Hello, everybody, and welcome into this week's edition of the Recruiting Roundup brought to you by Ortho, Arizona. I am recruiting analyst Cody Cameron, and joining me is the national recruiting editor of 24/7 Sports, Brandon Huffman. Brandon, this is awesome. It's your first time on the show here. We get to talk a little bit of college football and a little weekend here of recruiting that was massive for the local Arizona State Sun Devils. We're going to get to the game, but let's stick to pregame here. Like I said, a
Mhm.
long visitors list that featured some of the top prospects, not just in the state of Arizona, but also nationally. But let's stick to the in-state prospects here. Class of 2026 from Liberty High School defensive back Angel Thus was there. He's been a committed Sun Devil for a very, very long time. He loves going to ASU games. To me, Brandon, he's one of the best tacklers that I've seen in the state of Arizona from quite some time. He loves that game atmosphere. He always talks
Mhm.
about it. What do you think about Angel Thus?
Yeah, it's funny because I was at the game last week, the Liberty Centennial game, and I noted that. I kept saying, golly, he is in the backfield every play. He's a sure tackler, but he's not just a guy who, gets on, jumps on the pile, just brings the guy down. He'll hit you. He will
Yeah.
make his presence known, and you love that from a DB because there's a lot of DBs that are more of the cover guys. They don't want to get very physical. He wants to hit you like he's a defensive tackle, like he's a linebacker. Very instinctual, very twitchy. Does a really good job getting into the backfield. Can cover. He really moves well in space, and you can kind of see him being utilized in a number of different ways when he gets to ASU. And like you said, I mean, he's been committed for so long. I believe it's almost been a year. And if I remember right, he committed right before the Big 12 championship game, maybe like a week or two. So he saw that rise, and he's been kind of that flagship recruit of the in-state guys. And whenever they had like a junior day visit, whenever they had official visitors, he'd make the trip over there just to do, just kind of be there and be supportive. And so you could see that's the kind of core player that a Kenny Dillingham program wants. That local kid who bought in really before the meteoric rise and has stayed bought in. And I think that is going to make him very endearing to ASU fans. And then they're going to love the way he plays.
Brandon, one of my favorite classes in the state of Arizona was the 2020 class. I mean, it's got a
Mhm.
couple guys that are playing the NFL. It was so deep and loaded. Well, guess what? The class of 2027 and 2028, so the current juniors and sophomores, it's shaping up to be incredible classes. A couple of those players down there for unofficial visits at ASU who are a couple of those players.
Yeah, with 27, I mean, Trey Smith, I got a chance to see him on Thursday night in the Williams Field Shadow Ridge game, and another player that you could see that ASU is making a big time push for. I think there was only a handful of guys that got that 2027 offer, that official offer, and really making it, their prestigious, like saying, hey, we really covet you as a player. And then he got the full court treatment on Saturday. Really good player. He's not the biggest receiver out there, but he can flat out run. Very explosive, very dynamic player. Yazin Zion, I went and saw Desert Edge play on Friday night against Tolson. All the offensive lineman's attention is going to go to stopping Jelani George, and understandably so. There's a reason he's the number two player in the country. But what that does is it allows for Yazin Zion to make plays, and it's not like he's making plays because he's being ignored. He's making plays because he's a playmaker, still relatively new to football. Just kind of what you look at in a future three technique. A player that I'm really eager to see him develop for an entire offseason, fully dedicated to football. Talking to Coach Henry over there at Desert Edge, he said he had to convince him that you're not going to be a hooper long term. Come play football, and it's the move that's paying off. Obviously, Desert Edge is loaded in the 27th class, and he's a bit overshadowed by some of his teammates, but there's a very bright future there with Yazin Zion. Nikai Lambeth was also at the game on Saturday, 2028, part of that very vaunted 28 group at Desert Edge. And like you said, the state, and talking to Greg Biggins and Blair Angulo, who previously covered Arizona, like Blair, you kind of gave up Arizona to me probably a little too soon because these 27, 28 classes are pretty exciting. And obviously ASU is making a real, big push to keep those local kids home.
Brandon, when you talk about recruiting in the state of Arizona, what's going to happen? It happens every cycle. Kids are just going to want to leave, right? But that's everywhere.
Mhm.
Where you grew up, if you have opportunity to get out, kids will take it. Coach Kenny Dillingham's talked numerous times about that to the local media and stuff. But I think what's really, really interesting is when you have a game like this, just a marquee game, and you beat a top 10 team like they did against Texas Tech, you're given reasons to local kids to want to stay home. How
Mhm.
big of a win was this for the Sun Devils on the local recruiting scene?
So that was the fourth week in a row I'd been at a college football game at a traditional Pac-12 school. I was at the Washington Ohio State game in Seattle 3 weeks ago. I was at the Cal Duke game 2 weeks ago. I was at the Arizona BYU game last week, and then I was at the ASU game against Texas Tech. And you go back to the Washington Ohio State game, another big game. You have the number one team in the country. UW put a lot of their eggs in that basket to
Yep.
get recruits to come. When I started talking to these in-state kids back in August and July, saying, "Hey, what's your visit schedule look like?" Almost all of them were saying, "I'm going to be at that Texas Tech game in mid-October." And obviously, Texas Tech was getting some buzz. Well, then they have all this buzz coming to the game. So when you have a game like that, and you're going to have a huge recruiting weekend, you want to put your best foot forward. You don't want to go out and lose by 30. And we saw that with some teams. You want to be competitive. You want that game to look competitive. That atmosphere on Saturday was absolutely rocking for them to, have the lead for the majority of the game, to give the lead up, but then come back. The players that are rushing onto the field, or the fans rushing onto the field afterwards. And I mean, those players love that. They're all going live on their Instagram. They're talking about that atmosphere, but then it's also the product on the field
Yes.
was really good. That defense shut down that high powered offense. The offense made plays when they needed to make plays. And so that's the kind of game where you're showing that atmosphere. When you got guys like Jake Hildebrand going out to, going up to Washington for the Ohio State game, going out to Notre Dame, when you've got Noah Roberts taking a lot of these national visits, you've got these guys that you really want that are local, and they're going to these national programs where everybody talks about the great fanfare and the pageantry in the South or in the Midwest, and you do this right in their backyard, and you're winning, coming off a playoff season. You can't put a price tag on it. That's the kind of valuable weekend that will pay long-term dividends for that program. And that's the kind of game that you really do sell those local kids. Like, I don't need to go across the country. I can experience this right here in my backyard. And I think that's something that obviously the previous staffs at ASU really failed to grasp. And with the amount of talent that the state has really seen and the increasing talent, it makes it even more so important to have those kinds of atmospheres and to have those kind of wins, because that's what sells those young guys on saying, you know what, I don't need to go across the country to chase this energy, this atmosphere, a top 10 win. I could do it 20 minutes from home. That more than anything, I mean, obviously the win's important for the season, but the long term, the 2 to 3 year kind of byproduct of that win is going to be huge for ASU.
Yep, the Valley is activated, and that's huge credit to County Dillingham and company. Brandon, you are the man. For more recruiting news, head to our website, sports360az.com. Until next time.